I think we can add it after the fact.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Add it after the fact. All right. So our first question that we got was, and excuse me, I'm reading them off my phone because I can't have it open on my Skype. Is burning fat and building muscle at same time with a positive nitrogen balance a lie? And I think that
They're just going to
requires.
make everybody feel horrible, and they don't want to ask questions because they're going to make fun of them.
It's going to make fun of
Can
their
you
grammar.
proofread this question before Ryan kills me?
So I think that requires an explanation of what nitrogen balance is. Any takers on explaining how we actually get nitrogen balance, how we arrive at the figure that is nitrogen balance? Because I think people say it a lot, and they're like, I eat protein, and there's nitrogen, a la nitrogen balance. So do either of you want to explain what that is?
What's up?
Hector's the chemist, right?
Yeah, let's hear it, Hector. What is nitrogen balance all about?
Well, I mean, it's whether you're in a state of, having more protein than you're pretty much either burning or excreting or somewhat, because the way that your body's getting rid of nitrogen is through the nitrogen cycle and ammonia and stuff, and you pretty much just pee it out. So pretty much if you're in a positive nitrogen balance, you're just taking in more amino acids and more proteins than are necessary for your bodily functions. That's all that means. Now, I think what he's getting at is it possible to, I think I might be wrong, but the question he might be getting at is it possible to build muscle and burn fat if you're under the conditions that are necessary to burn fat, i.e. if you're hypocaloric? Can you have a positive nitrogen balance if you are hypocaloric? Because by definition, you are taking in less nutrients than your body needs to be sustained for the day. But there's a difference between having enough energy, right, and having enough protein in your diet. To a point, obviously, those two things are going to kind of combat, because if you're trying to get contest prep lean, your calories are going to be really, really low, to the point where you're possibly not going to be taking in as much protein as is necessary to build new tissue, or to maybe even sustain the amount of muscle that you currently have. But for the average person who's possibly asking this, who's just looking to get a six-pack or get sub 10% for summer or something, I think it's entirely possible to build muscle and burn fat in the early stages. And what's your input on that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple subsets of the weightlifting population that can actually do that, where they are building muscle and losing fat at the same time. Your ultra beginner, or the person that you're describing, where they just kind of want to lose like 5 pounds of fat, like trim up, slim up for like a high school reunion or a wedding or something like that. And then you get into the anabolic steroid users as well, where anabolic steroids, correct me if I'm wrong here, just increase your nitrogen efficiency so you can do more with less.
Yeah, so they work through several different ways. It's weird because what we think about building muscle in terms of lifting weights and eating protein is actually a slightly different mechanism than the way that something like testosterone will produce muscle gains, because you have all these pathways, and there's certainly some interrelationships there for sure. But that being said, you have what metabolic stress,
TSC2 or something.
Yeah, you have like potentially muscle damage, and then just mechanical tension that's going to produce all these pathways that then elicit the muscle cell to pretty much grow. But testosterone and stuff, that's going to act on a specific receptor, and downstream they might be the same pathways, but it's kind of separate initially upstream, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So eating food, lifting weights, both ways to increase mTOR signaling. And so you're saying testosterone or exogenous hormone use can signal the same pathway, but the way you arrive at that endpoint is different.
It's different, exactly. Yeah.
So
One paper,
the beginner and the steroid user are going to arrive at that fat loss and muscle gain at the same time. They're going to both get there, but the way that they're going to get there is very, very different.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have to differentiate that between, a natural who's maybe in the beginning stages, who can probably get decently lean and still build muscle. And it's even a whole other story. Paul and Ryan, you guys are both bodybuilders. Ryan, you've been pretty much successful in bodybuilding. When someone is near that, and I hate to say the word genetic potential, if somebody's really, really developed, it's likely they're probably not going to be at a stage where they can build muscle and lose fat to any significant degree.
No. Yeah. Yeah. Once you're in that advanced state, once you're at that 5, 6, even upwards of like 10 years of resistance training experience,
absolutely,
the idea that you can build muscle and lose fat at the same time is, to use this guy's own words, that then it becomes a lie. Then it's a point where there needs to be very, very specific nutritional periodization that says, listen, between the months of August to February, I am in a specific mass gain phase. And then from February to whatever it is, May, then I'm in a very specific fat loss phase. And those are my only goals for those phases.
Exactly.
I think even with like steroid users too, when you hit that advanced stage, and then genetics are a part of that too, and their individual response and doses and stuff. Even that for them, like if their aim is to build muscle and lose fat at the same time, it's such a slow process. It's almost negligible. Like you can't even notice it or see it happening, or in the end you're like, oh, like did they even get bigger? Like I can't really tell.
Yeah.
What might be an even pretty intuitive example, because a lot of people have been athletes in high school and college and stuff, and it's like if you run a 15-minute mile and you want to get that down to 10 minutes, you're chopping off 5 minutes. You can do that in 2-3 months of training, and at the same time you could still lift weights and get stronger. But if you run a 5-minute mile and you're trying to just chop off 30 seconds off that, you're not going to be able to do that and increase your squat by 100 pounds, because those divergent ways of getting to those two goals. And once you're already so advanced at one, same thing, if you're, trying to squat 600-700 pounds, chances are your sprint time is not going to decrease. You're not going to get any faster. You're probably going to get slower because you're at such a high level already. It takes so much more to get those small incremental increases, and losing body fat and building muscles at a certain point, it's the same exact thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what about just a hypothetical? I don't mean to cut you off, Paul.
No, you're fine.
But a hypothetical. What about someone who, let's say they've got a background in purely like bro powerlifter training, very, very low volume, very, very high intensity, and they're at like a moderate body fat, let's say a 20% body fat, but they've got 8 years of training experience in that specific style of training. If that individual switched over to bodybuilder, hypertrophy-oriented training, do you think that's an individual that could build muscle mass and lose body fat at the same time?
I think potentially, dude. I mean, and I'm assuming we're talking about somebody who didn't spend a ton of time doing a lot of the like accessory stuff, they probably have underdeveloped like medial lats and certain muscle groups that I would say don't have the same number of years of experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, but I wouldn't expect it to happen at a large degree. I mean, these smaller muscles, like how much are they going to grow? They're not going to add pounds and pounds and pounds of lean tissue. Probably.
Because I saw Shelby Starnes posted today or yesterday, I forget when the post was from, and he basically said that early on in your career you should just focus on getting as strong as possible, focus on the core movements and get as strong as you possibly can, and then later on in your career,
glad you brought that up,
transition over. So that kind of made me think of that.
Because I know I when I read that, I instantly thought that you would disagree because you have a different view, right? Where probably early on you don't want to be as strong as you possibly can because that makes a lot of your work suck. Like when 70% of your squat is in the 400 pounds, and so now you're doing like sets of 8 or 10 with 450 or something like that. Like that's miserable.
Yeah, I think it depends. I think it depends on the end goal. So if your goal is 5 years from now, let's say you bring on a client who's 16 years old and he says, when I'm in my 20s, I want to be a world-class powerlifter. You start him when he's in his teenage years by getting him as big as possible to set him up later in life to be as strong as possible. So I guess I kind of agree and disagree with Shelby there. I think you need to kind of define what you're saying by strength. Does he mean like relative strength, like you should get as strong as possible in the 6 to 15 repetition range? Or does he mean you should push your 1RM as high as possible. Because I think it's the former that he actually means, not the latter.
Yeah, it's just weird because he used the term powerlifter, and I almost kind of wonder, does he actually mean like get really fucking strong, or just proficient with basic core lifts?
I think he means the second.
Huh?
I think he means the second one. Yeah, where you should get relatively strong for your end goal in those specific core movements, and then transfer that over to bodybuilding style training. But I can't imagine that he means that you should get your squat to 800 pounds before you consider any bodybuilding training.
No doubt, no doubt. Well,
but you look at someone like Ronnie Coleman, and that's actually the exact trajectory that he took, where he started out early on in his life powerlifting, had an 800 or whatever pound deadlift, and then switched over, and it seemed to work very well for him. But I think that Ronnie Coleman is one. Yeah, Ronnie Coleman, I don't think is the example that you want to look at there for your average bodybuilder, your natural bodybuilder, whatever you want to talk about.
Now, let me ask you this, guys. And this is just observational. I really don't have anything to go off this. It seems to me that bodybuilders who bodybuild for a couple years and then go into powerlifting tend to do better than powerlifters who then go into bodybuilding. And I think that's because building muscle takes so long, and it's just such a big contributor to, your capacity for strength. Not your current strength at the moment, but just your capacity to get stronger. That if you spend 5 or 6 years building up a lot of muscle tissue, it's going to be a lot easier to then condition that muscle tissue to be better via, better movement patterns, maybe some neural adaptations, things like rate coding, which can happen a lot faster than muscle growth, versus a powerlifter who has spent several years perfecting technique, which is useful for hypertrophy to an extent, and in terms of actually targeting the intended muscle and staying injury free. But if you've been powerlifting for 6 years, it's going to take you a lot longer to build enough muscle to be considered, proficient at bodybuilding. At least that's my opinion. What do you guys think?
I don't know.
I tend to agree with that. If you take someone who has a ton of muscle mass, and then you put them into powerlifting, to where for only 8 to 12 weeks, whatever it may be, they just have to basically teach that muscle to exert more force via both intra and intermuscular coordination, basically teach them movements and then teach the muscle to produce a lot of force. I think they'll have a lot more success than someone who goes the opposite direction, where they're extremely strong, they're a 700-pound squatter, and it's like, all right, it's time to squat 8 sets of 8 at 70% of your 1RM. It's okay, well, 70% of my 1RM is 495. It's 225 kilos. Like, my knees are just going to explode. So in the case of the powerlifter, if the powerlifter actually wanted to have success in bodybuilding, it might be in his or her best advantage to intentionally take time off from training, get weaker, and then come back to training when they're weaker and start their hypertrophy training. Because if they start their hypertrophy training at their absolute strongest, they're just going to snap in half. Which is why I think a lot of powerlifters end up breaking when they transition to these hypertrophy phases. All of my powerlifters, when they transition to hypertrophy phases, I'm like, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take 80 to 85% of your max. That's your new 1RM that you program off of. We're going to do sets of 10, and they're going to seem relatively easy, but they're going to be at a 1 to 4 RIR, and it's going to be enough to stimulate hypertrophy. It's not going to be the usual grinders that beat you down into the ground work that you're used to with powerlifting, but this is the stuff that's actually going to be productive.
See, that's interesting, because I would almost, so when I transition a powerlifter to, the starting phases of their macro cycle, where basically we're just building on working new tissue. I keep the specificity extremely low for that reason, because if somebody's doing 8 with 70%, and that's, 450 pounds, that is going to beat them up a lot. But I feel like we can get just as big of a hypertrophic stimulus by transitioning to a movement that they're not familiar with, and allows them to maybe not as much stimulus, but damn close with a lot less wear and tear, because they have to use less load. People like to compare 400 pounds on the squat to 400 pounds on the leg press. Not exactly, not equivocal by any means, Yeah,
I agree. It's as simple as switching from a back squat to a front squat, or from a back squat to a hack squat, switching a deadlift to a hex bar deadlift or a trap bar deadlift, whatever you want to call it. Paul even likes to use rack pulls, right, Paul?
I don't know, man. I think a lot of it's a volume. Like a lot of these guys too, when they do have such like crazy squats, you can generally give them a lot less volume. You know, do you think like maybe sometimes some of these guys you may be hitting them with too much volume, kind of giving them what, like starting them at what you think most bodybuilders would use versus like maybe seeing how they just handle like 10 sets a week or something like that.
So finishing them in like week 4 of a program with like 6x8 when they could have been fine with like 3x8.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's a good point.
Yeah, I think a good strategy that I use, I don't know if you guys have done this, is right as they're finishing up, a peaking cycle and they're going into those high repetitions, which they're going to hate. It's going to be awful. When you're used to doing doubles and now you got to do a set of 15, it's about the worst thing in the world. I actually have done like I guess you could almost call it a mesocycle because it's a 3-week intro, where we're starting off at something that's like an RP5 at 70%, and we're slowly adding repetitions, given that they can tolerate it until they're doing 70% for a set of 8 or 10. And they're like, yeah, this is fine. I've spent 3 weeks. And a lot of athletes don't want to do that because you know how they are. They want to do the productive work now, but they don't understand, hey, look, this really small period is setting you up to be able to do more productive work later. Does that make sense?
After the first week, they thank you for it, like their first set of 8 after doing doubles or singles. They're like, okay, yeah, I kind of think I could go home now after like 2 sets.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I like that idea of doing a lot of stuff that's even more sub-max than usual, because if you think about like what you said, from switching over to heavy doubles to 8s, like just from switching doubles to 8s, that's already a huge novel stimulus. So why make them take that all the way to RPE 7 or 8 just because the literature says, okay, you got to take it to a 7 or an 8 for it to be productive? Well, they're used to 2s. Let's switch over to 8s. Let's keep it at an RPE 5. That's enough of a stimulus for them where they're still going to be able to grow. We can keep the volume low, and the risk reward is really, really in favor of reward rather than risk.
Yeah.
I think it's a good idea.
I mean, a lot of those guys too, like if you set them at a weight that's like an RPE 5, like their second set is probably going to jump to like a 7 anyway. Because they're not used to how much it burns and the pump that they have in their quads and when they're doing squats or whatever that they're doing.
Yeah.
Like a lot of it, sometimes I will just jump them up, and I'll put them at a decent intensity, but I'll just give them like 2 sets for their main movement.
Yeah. That's plenty. I would say that's plenty.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you really have to focus on building that work capacity.
Huh?
It's hard to breathe even through a set of 8 once you're used to doubles. You start thinking this is just 4 doubles. That's what I'm going to think about this. I'm going to do 2, rest for 30 seconds, do 2 again, and just keep doing that until I get through the set. It's exhausting.
It's a wonder what that does for you mentally, though.
Oh, it's awful.
Like that.
I know you've had that before, though, where you're used to 2s, and then you're like bracing for your 6th rep, and you're throwing up in your mouth, and you're like, oh my God, I still have to do this 2 more times. Holy shit.
Just I remember your chest is fucking.
Yeah.
It was in the middle of a pretty low volume block. I was lifting around 80 to 90%, so not anything crazy. But I had the idea of this guy these new BFR straps, and I was like, oh man, I should do BFR squats with these. Like I'm really excited. And I remember I did BFR squats, and 60 repetitions later, within 5 minutes, I was on the ground. I near puking, couldn't breathe. I thought I was gonna die.
I did BFR squats with slingshot wraps once, and it like hurt while I was going, but I didn't. I was like, it just kind of hurts. Like, well, whatever. I pull them off, and my inner thighs are chafed to the point where they're bleeding down my legs.
Oh my God.
I have blood going. Yeah, so like blood, sweat, and tears. I'm your guy. I'm the one that'll take it there.
Some gooch.
But yeah, so don't do that. Don't do that. I think I did like 95 pounds, and it was like one of the worst experiences of my life.
That's about what I used. It was terrible.
How did we get it?
Just how we always do it. We just go. But to, I guess, the takeaway on the question, the actual question that we were asked. So what was the question? Is muscle gain, fat loss in positive nitrogen balance a lie? And it's definitely not a lie. The only way that you can be actually gaining muscle is if you're in a positive nitrogen balance. So it's not only is it not a lie, it's the only way that can actually happen. And then who it can actually happen for is a very specific population, and it's probably not someone who's going to be asking questions for us.
Yeah, and just keep in mind, energy balance and nitrogen balance are 2 separate things. You can be you can be hypocaloric, as in you're in energy deficit, but be intaking more protein than you're excreting through something like the urea cycle, right?
Yeah.
And you can also be hypercaloric, where you're at a surplus, but not intaking enough protein. And then the end result is you're not going to be building new tissue at that point.
Yeah.
I think that's a problem that a lot of people run into, where they're consuming plenty of calories. They don't know what their protein needs actually are. So they're not, especially in the early stages of training where they're not building as much muscle as they would like. And they're like, well, I'm eating enough. And you have them do a nutritional analysis and they're eating like 45 grams of protein. It's like, all right, well, we got to switch some of this over.
Yeah, I think a lot of the people that ask these questions, they're always in this weird place where they've almost kind of exhausted their noob gains. They're maybe like 3 years into training and things have slowed down. And everyone that has asked me this, they just end up spinning their wheels for like a couple years before they figure it out. Like whenever people aim to do this, lose body fat and gain muscle at the same time, it just seems like wasted time.
Yeah, you either get neither or a blunted response for both. Where you're just spinning your wheels, not getting anything, or you're not gaining as much muscle or losing as much fat as you possibly could.
Yeah, and Paula, you brought up a really good point when we were talking earlier. You said that whether you're at an energy deficit or energy surplus, or whether you're building or breaking down muscle, that's not like a state you're in 24 hours a day. You're going through fluctuations, right, where you're at a surplus and you're anabolic, and you're going through fluctuations where you're at a deficit and catabolic, and it's just the net sum of all those together that's going to dictate what happened for the day in terms of the net sum. But you're having fluctuation. Protein turnover ratio is changing, constantly with every meal. And as you obviously the hours after the meal.
Yeah.
That's always the one that makes light bulbs go off for people. It's like, well, I want to burn body fat all day long. It's like, okay, well, you better not eat at all. You better have zero meals today.
The insulin spike thing. I think the only other population worth mentioning before we, I guess, leave this question behind is what's always neat, though, is picking up the clients or having a client leave for a while. They fall off the wagon, they quit training, they get kind of chubby, and they come back and they're ready to get back at it. The whole muscle memory thing,
Yeah.
Yeah, I like to see that. Or the people who come off the androgens for a while, they're off, they stop lifting for like 2 years, and then they come back to you and they cycle back on, and it's like they just become superhuman in a matter of weeks.
Yeah, it's that myonuclear domain theory, man. It comes back so much faster than it took to build it.
As soon as you've expanded that domain.
Yeah. That's another topic that's really interesting, and there's a current question in the literature. Are satellite cells, and for anybody who doesn't know, satellite cells are just, you can think of them as muscle stem cells that just donate more nuclei to the muscle, and with that, the capacity for growth goes up. And there's a big controversy. It's like, are they necessary for growth? And I kind of think that's the wrong question. I don't think they're necessary for growth, but I think they're necessary for an increased capacity for growth, because you can certainly grow muscle without adding more nuclei. However, once you have grown so much tissue around this nucleus, right, and really the space for everything to travel is just too far. If you want to grow further, you're going to need another hub there to take care of that new tissue, and there's some debatable data, but a lot of the debate comes from animal models, and you got to remember, animals are not humans. I mean, we're similar to a point, of course, and a lot of that research is necessary, but like mice have like, I think 4 muscle fibers, cats can bypass the size principle. Like there's definitely some differences there that, we have to keep in mind when we're interpreting research like that, although it's extremely interesting.
You know what I struggle with? I think it's a lot of the naturals that see that research and they're like, okay, you maintain these myonuclei for several years or potentially your whole life. And then they say that past steroid users have this advantage always because they have this extra myonuclei. But I think I don't know about you guys, but I've met quite a few people who have come off androgen use, and they don't really seem to have much of a benefit. They tend to get weaker. They tend to lose a lot of size. How do you guys feel about that? Like the argument that, and obviously, if they begin their androgen use again, they blow up incredibly quickly because of those myonuclei and the androgens. But when they just come off completely, it does sort of seem like a lot of those benefits aren't there anymore.
Yeah, I'll let you kind of tackle that first. I have some opinions on it.
Yeah, so I have some opinions on it as well. None of it is really like I found this in the literature and it's conclusive, but I think that it returns them closer to their baseline prior to their androgen usage. But I don't think that it ever, unless they completely take off from training, I don't think they ever return all the way back to their baseline. They're still slightly elevated. So if this is where they were when they were natural, this is where they were when they were on androgens. They come off completely and they return here. So they're still above where they started here, and they're going to get weaker, like significantly weaker than when they were on, and they're not going to have the capacity for growth and strength gains like they used to, but I don't think it returns them back to where they were before. I think that they are still superior than where they were when they first started.
I guess it's hard to, I guess the argument is like whether it's practically, I guess, significant or meaningful, their new elevated kind of baseline once coming off. Like everybody just assumes it's this great, like they're forever at such a great advantage, and it doesn't really like anecdotally seem that way, you know?
Yeah, I think that there's some context necessary for that question. Ryan, I agree with your opinion a lot. So I don't think the question is whether when they come off, if they're building at the same rate. They might be building at the same rate as a natural. Obviously they're not going to be building at the same rate as when they were on. But I think the question is, have they increased their capacity or their ceiling now that there's more nuclei there to handle more tissue when it is built? And I think another thing, there's a study that came out maybe a year or two ago. I'm going to butcher this, but so certain parts of your DNA encode for things like actin and myosin and whatnot. And when you have those pathways, those cellular pathways are going to cause these to be obviously, transcribed, translated, and then, endpoint is you have a bigger muscle, right? Well, it turns out that so DNA itself actually wraps around these little proteins called histones. And these histones and the DNA itself can actually have modifications to it. One of them being acetylation and another being methylation. And think about this. Let's say you have a gene that's being constantly transcribed and translated all the time. It would make it easier for your body to be like, okay, this gene is being, obviously used so much. I should make the access to it a little bit easier, right? So that way the transcription and translation can be just a little bit more efficient. And what can happen is when you're constantly transcribing and translating, a certain gene, these modifications like acetylation or methylation, that can actually cause the DNA to either bind or unbind a little bit tighter or looser to the histone, making it more accessible for transcription factors. And a really interesting question, I think, is if somebody uses anabolics, and obviously they're transcribing a certain gene all the time, does that make it more likely even after they come off, because you've had these methylations and you have these acetylations and obviously lysines and leucines can be attached, does that mean that even when they come off, the triggering of that gene is just a little bit more efficient? And not just that, but is it efficient enough to be significant? I think that's the real question. Mm-hmm. If we're talking about a 0.01% increase and how fast or how well you transcribe something, it's like, okay, whatever, that's extremely negligible. Yeah. And I know at least with androgen use, the rate at which ribosomes will translate pretty much RNA, mRNA to proteins, it does increase. It does get a little bit more efficient. Now, does that stick around afterwards? Is there a difference in the rate of efficiency of the ribosomes? Are there more of them? I think it's a really interesting question that would be extremely hard and unethical to test. But going back to your point, Paul, it might be happening, but it might just not be significant enough to actually impact anything.
Yeah. I guess also I'm more so thinking of it from a bodybuilding perspective, whereas I think a lot of the argument lies in sports and performance. And, It's easy for me to visually look at, say, a retired bodybuilder lose a lot of size, go on TRT doses, or potentially even have, maybe they decide not to go on TRT and they actually have suppressed testosterone the rest of their life. And of course, they're going to get smaller.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Versus what sort of advantage is left for the performance athlete. So
I think that's a good distinction in, did they come off cold turkey not taking anything at all, or did they transition onto TRT dosage? Because the physiological response is very, very different for those two situations. And then another anecdotally on top of that is that from people that I've known who used to bodybuild, who used to use androgens, who competed at a high level, and then they stopped. They also stopped training or very, very much dialed down their training to where they were all about it every single day of the week. Every meal was tracked. They stopped their androgen use. They stopped bodybuilding, and all of a sudden meals are spotty. They're lifting 3 times a week. They don't really care as much about their sleep. Maybe they're going out and drinking with their friends now. They're partying on the weekends. So they could live a completely different lifestyle.
Yeah.
And so many things are setting them up to be getting smaller. It's only possible to measure this if they live the exact same life when they transition.
Absolutely. That's a really good point, man.
No doubt.
That's all I got on that one.
I think
Jay Walden will be pleased with that answer.
I think it's a really good answer. I hadn't even thought of that, but and it's like you don't have a controlled setting, and we're obviously observing, and observational data has its limitations. But like you said, you rarely have someone who peaked and they were doing awesome, and something happens where they have to get off, or they just for personal reasons get off. It's like they're not gonna have that same fire, because if you're going from adding 15 pounds on your squat every 2 weeks to adding 15 pounds every 4 months, there's not as much incentive to go in there and kick ass when you're like, 2 years ago these increases were just on the regular.
No doubt. No, that actually is a good perspective, just because even looking at, like, you wouldn't expect a retired Olympian, like Olympia winner, to give their same effort, like, oh, I'm retiring next year. They're not living that life forever,
No,
things are not.
No.
Okay.
You guys want to roll along to the next question?
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Next question we got is from my client, Lindsay King. She says, what's the best day of the week or time to have refeeds, and how to position my off days?
Never.
Don't take off days. Don't take refeeds. You need to be dieting harder and training harder.
Every day, no matter what.
Yeah.
What do you think, Paul? What's the best time to take a refeed? What do you think is the best day of the week? Positioning, programming?
Tuesday for sure.
Tuesdays at noon is when you want to start. You want to be done by 2 p.m.
Yeah.
Why? Because
not every day. I feel like every day is the best day for a refeed.
That's my tactic, honestly.
That's why Paul weighed in at 231 this morning.
Ooh.
Got him.
Yeah. Yeah, I struggle with the, I think a lot of people that I'm assuming, asking about the refeed in terms of when it's the most beneficial for their training. Is that sort of how you think this question is coming across?
So right now she's in contest prep. So she might mean like fat loss, she might mean training efficiency. So let's try and tackle both.
Okay. Well, I mean, just from training, man, I don't know about you guys, but anecdotally, I mean, I never really noticed any real beneficial impact of a refeed on training outside of looking cool and getting a better pump for like a day. Like, I don't have a refeed 4 hours before my training. Like, probably how long is that, does that refeed take to completely digest and absorb, and you're actually like utilizing that refeed, or even the day before, So yeah. I think refeeds are just extremely overvalued, overappreciated by bodybuilders, in my opinion. And then even from a fat loss phase, all these extra calories, when it comes to a single meal refeed or a single day refeed, they still need to be accounted for. You still need to be in a deficit at the end of the week. And so really, in my opinion, it just tends to slow things down. I think things tend to run a bit more smoothly when you talk about these single day refeeds, if you just don't have them, because I have to factor them in. Like, when I give you your weekly calories and your refeed target, if you take a refeed, we're probably going to need some low days to offset that, unless that refeed, unless your deficit is just so big,
Yeah.
And then I think where things get a little bit cool sometimes are the multiple day refeeds, and those may be beneficial, but I feel like this might not be the question to get into that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the scope of the question is just a single day refeed. What are kind of some of the benefits? So the reason I still program in refeed days, but it's more on the psychological end of things. I have something to look forward to. I don't think that there are any physiological benefits of it, and I have yet to be convinced that there are any physiological benefits of it, because you have to understand that a lot of those extra calories are used to dissipate some of the fatigue that you already have from dieting. You're going to offset some of that and burn off some of that just as heat as you're eating the meal. Like, we've all eaten a big refeed meal before, and all of a sudden you have huge pit stains. That's your body offsetting or putting off a lot of that heat or those extra calories just in thermic effect of the extra food. And it's like, all right, well, now my argument is that, well, you're going to replenish your glycogen stores. Well, the most demanding resistance training session that you're going to have is going to deplete what, 40, 50% at the absolute maximum?
Not even like 30%. I've heard.
You got to kill yourself to get to 40%.
I was looking at, I didn't read the whole study, but like, even if you don't eat post training, you begin to replenish muscle glycogen through like all those like partial.
I think that I was reading. I think Menno posted that. He was talking about how the citric acid or the Cori cycle uses some leftover lactate. Cori cycle uses lactate post training to start to replenish glycogen even in a fasted state.
Yeah. I'm assuming probably like glycerol and stuff too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. You can turn it to pyruvate and then work your way back up to. That's the thing about when people talk about like who's the girl who was saying like, oh, you shut down the Krebs cycle?
Oh yeah, Lane posted her. I forget what her name was.
And it's like, this is what people don't understand about metabolism. It is so complicated. It is incredibly complicated. And whenever there's a spot where you try to block something, your body is so redundant in mechanisms for survival that whatever you try to do, whatever you try to cheat, it's not going to work because it has 15 other ways of getting around that. And a really cool example is actually cancer. So mitochondria in cancer are super defective. So they don't use the Krebs cycle a whole lot, but they have plenty of other ways. And it's funny because if you starve a cancer of one nutrient, it can actually just bypass that and find another way to grow, which is why it's so freaking dangerous. It can even produce, like, there's a part of the Krebs cycle, I forget, that's blocked off in cancer. And all it does is just starts producing a bunch of bilirubin, believe it or not. But again, people are like, oh yeah, just don't eat that, just don't eat carbs, don't eat fats, and you'll block this off. Don't worry, there's 50 other ways. Awesome. And energy balance is end all be all, like, for sure, 100%.
You know what I love, man? You can like Google all these or like people who are in their undergrad or even where I'm at in my master's, and we learn about these energy systems, and you have a chart for glycolysis and you have a chart for Krebs, and
those are all interconnected.
And well, what's awesome is like we have these three charts, but if you like look at like a full detailed map out of metabolism, it's like this is just static of lines, and like I'm like I don't even know how to look at this. Like
it looks like a roadmap to like a country, because everything's like, there's so many interconnections between everything. The only thing, and like I'm not an expert, but the only thing I've found, and I've never done this, I just have read and obviously through classes and stuff. The only thing I've found that can probably hold anything to energy balance, and it's still technically not destroying the law, is and I will go on the record to say I don't think anybody should take this, and I think if you see it, you should run the other direction as fast as possible, is DMP. I'm sure you guys have heard about this. There are some people who are proponents of it, and so and you guys know through your exercise physiology classes that when you eat whatever nutrients, pretty much at the very end of oxidation, all you're doing is you're just pumping protons into mitochondria. And then that pressure and that gradient causes ATP to be made for energy. The only thing I found that can actually dissipate that is DMP, because DMP can go into the mitochondria, start dissipating that proton gradient without making ATP. So pretty much a lot of that energy is lost and released as heat without it being used efficiently to make ATP. So your cells have to burn even more. But at that point, we're not even breaking energy balance. At that point, you're just moving something so it can't be used as efficiently anymore. And obviously, because that's not something your body makes, there's not a way around that.
So is that what people mean when they say that DNP? What do they say? They say it uncouples the mitochondria.
It's an uncoupler, and we use uncouplers in the lab. We use we use, I believe, CCCP and FCCP when we do mitochondrial respiration in cells. And yeah, because it's not something our body makes or is equipped to handle, it can completely break that gradient. So you are literally stopping respiration, or you're starving the cell. But here's the thing: there's a very fine line between uncoupling just a little bit and completely destroying the gradient. Respiration stops, the cell dies within milliseconds. And that's why it's so dangerous. It's not like another drug where you're like, oh, I'll just go to the hospital. You won't make it. You won't make it out of the door. You won't even make it fast enough to close the pill bottle. Like, you're just done at that point. And obviously dosages and stuff, but that's the only thing I've found that can kind of go around energy balance to an extent.
And when people talk about uncoupling the mitochondria, what does that actually do for metabolism? Because I've heard some reports from DMP that it can increase metabolism by 150 to 200%. Is there truth in that? I'm sure it's dose dependent.
So I don't know the exact percentages or numbers. I know the mechanism of action. So when we're talking about uncoupling, it means that we're removing the movement of protons to the production of ATP. So when we're talking about a mitochondria, it pretty much looks like this, right? And you get a bunch of protons into this inner compartment, and there's this one little pathway for them to get out. And the movement of them going through that little pathway actually causes this specific complex to crank. And as it cranks, it moves a phosphate and an ADP together so hard that they merge and out pops an ATP.
Yeah.
Right? The ATP is being made because there's so many protons in this inner compartment that's rushing out, right? Concentration gradients. If you have a lot here, they're going to want to get out. Now, what DMP does is it starts taking protons out without going through that little pathway. So now you've got less protons for ATP, but the cell still needs ATP or else it's going to die. So what does it do? It starts taking more fat, beta oxidation, glycolysis, whatnot, to make more, FADH, NADH, to pump more protons, but you keep dissipating that gradient, right?
I think, to me, it sounds like people are trying to equate the fact that, because it sounds like it just essentially makes energy production inefficient. Like, you're losing a lot of what you're making. And so I think people try to more so think of it as like we're making metabolism faster because they need to eat more.
When you want to be efficient.
So I think people just try, like, they say increases metabolism 200%, but they're just trying to equate the increased percentage of calories they need to how much.
So
what's actually happening.
This is a really good example. It's gonna be a lot easier to understand. So imagine you're driving your car and you're getting 20 miles per gallon, and in this example, the gasoline is the fat or whatever it is that you use to make substrates to make ATP, right? So imagine that every 2 hours you have to stop and get gas. Well, now I come with a knife and I just go to your gas tech and I do this. Well, now instead of having to stop every 2 hours because gas is leaving the tank without producing energy for the car to move forward, right? That potential energy is just being lost, right? What do you have to do? Well, now you have to stop every 40 minutes because you're like, shit, man, what's happening? Like, my gas tank keeps going on empty and I've barely done anything because it's inefficient, because you're pretty much bleeding potential energy out of somewhere. And in this case, you're releasing it as heat. But that's pretty much the mechanism of action. And there's actually some pharmaceutical companies that are trying to look at a safe way to produce an uncoupler to treat stuff like obesity, which is super interesting. But at the same time, mitochondrial respiration is so important for life that if you fuck that up, like, you're just dead. There's no antidote. There's no time. Like, you're just done in a second.
I think what really increased, because I've met quite a few people involved in bodybuilding that are like, yeah, I've used it. You just, I don't know why everybody's demonizing it. You just got to use it correctly. But I think the biggest worry is really just that it's dosed in micrograms, and people are buying stuff.
That margin is that big.
And like, I don't know, how people, get their DMP, but I'd imagine if you're buying it from some dude who is selling it out of his apartment or ordering raws, like, he's not measuring micrograms in his apartment without like some serious lab equipment or,
Exactly. Yeah. And with the margin of efficacy to death being so small, yeah, dude, I make mistakes in a lab all the time. All right. Like, You know, sometimes it's 1 microliter and it's 2, and that will throw off your experiment entirely. You know, but there's a difference between me being like, oh, I have to analyze these proteins again, versus your body being like, oh, I guess we're just not gonna survive anymore. Like you're just done. You know,
You cook your insides and then you're dead.
Yeah, well, you pretty much suffocate them, to be honest. Yeah, it's pretty bad.
It's sad, man. This past competitive year, man, I've met a couple bikini girls who hired a coach, and the coach was like, okay, well, you know, if you want to do well, you need to take this being DMP among other things. And you know, the girls kind of, for whatever reason, not doing their research and just being like, okay, well, I want to win, and then competitive season's over, and they're like, I can't believe I put this in my body with a bunch of other stuff, and they're like, no wonder everything is going right now.
Yeah, that sucks, man, because like, and like I get it. If you don't know, it just seems like a magic pill, and like, you know, obviously the propensity for people to use things to their advantage is high, but you know, that's why I think like education is so important, because if you really know how dangerous it is, you're like, it's not really worth it. You know, it's not worth putting your life that close to death just for, you know, a trophy and admiration or whatnot. But yeah, well, man, education is key.
With the direction that you kind of see bikini going, specifically in the NPC, do you think that it's becoming, because I've always held the belief that it's been a division where you actually need any illicit substances to compete at a high level, but with the direction that it's going, these big state shows and especially the national shows, do you think that bikini is becoming a division where it's going to be something like bodybuilding, where like if you're not taking drugs, you are irrelevant?
Dude, you know what, man? Yeah, I remember a few years ago, it was very easy for everybody to say, you can compete in bikini and not take anything.
Look at the 2010 Nationals. As short as 2010, look at the NPC Nationals. Look what the girls look like, and look at them now. It's not even close.
Dude, when we went to the Universe for Christina's show, outside of like them wearing different bikinis, like I was looking around, I wouldn't have been able to tell, you know, that a lot of those bikini girls weren't figure.
Yeah.
Like they're getting so lean, and they're getting like cap delts, like great definition.
Cap delts, vascularity in the arms, vascularity in the abs. You're seeing girls that are so lean and have so little in their stomach that they can pull like a vacuum on stage, quad separation. Dude, from the back, you're seeing the hamstrings pull out. You're seeing the glutes completely separated.
Yeah, like hamstring separation and shit. It's wild, man. Like they're seriously like pretty close to having glute striations, you know. At the last local show I went to and had a bikini competitor in, and it's crazy.
Yeah. So do you think it's kind of becoming a division where you need some sort of enhancement to compete at that level?
I think it's shifting in that direction.
Yeah, you know? I think they're really kind of just making it downsized figure.
Yeah. And I think that's what seems to happen to almost, you know, a lot of classes until they're forced to make a new class.
Yeah.
You know? Like figure is starting to look more like physique.
We saw that with men's physique as well.
Bodybuilding.
Like these men's physique guys were just getting massive, and they were like, all right, well, we got to make a new division, downsized bodybuilding. We'll call it classic physique.
Yeah. And eventually, like, the only differences between classes becomes like how they pose. You know?
And it's becoming a very strange environment where there is no class in the NPC that you can get away without using drugs.
And sometimes
they're all, you have to be like, drugs are the toll that you have to pay to get into any of these divisions.
And it's bikini more so than a lot of other classes, but a lot of times it depends on the area and like who's judging the show. Like you never know. Sometimes they give you know, top 5 to softer girls, but I feel like as more time goes on, more of these top 5 girls are looking like they belong on a national stage, and then all the girls on the national stage are like striated and crazy lean. So
I think that does even more of a disservice to the sport than asking everyone to meet one standard, because when you're at a local show and you win an overall at a local show, you qualify for nationals and you won the local show because you were a little bit softer, and then you show up at nationals with that exact same look that won you something at the local level, and you get destroyed, you get 5th call out because of it. I think that does even worse things. But yeah, I was in Miami for nationals, and all the bikini girls were shredded to the bone. ridiculous.
I feel like we see examples of that. I mean, maybe not all the time, but sometimes where you're like, damn, like this girl should be a pro, but she's like so far ahead of everyone and looks so different from everyone. It seems like she gets placed lower. And it's just,
Yeah.
I think it's an issue that Christina has, where Christina is built more like a physique competitor, but because she's not as large as a physique competitor is, she still she fits into the size of figure, but has the build of physique.
that's how I feel like when she does her, like I feel like when she does physique style posing, like a lot of her muscle bellies and stuff really shine, you know?
Yeah.
So do you guys think, and you guys would know better than me, that that's more apparent at the high level? Maybe at the low level, you can do reasonably well without having to delve into much drug use.
For sure.
I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think another issue too is a lot of the because of that, like a lot of females will start lifting and then within like their first year or two decide they're ready to do a show. Versus like spending a few years gaining the muscle and building a physique and then competing. So I think a lot of girls are trying to get on that fast track. So like, oh, I lost to this girl who's been training for like 4 years.
Yeah.
And let's take a little bit of Anavar. So they want to jump the gun and take some Anavar or whatever they want to take.
Yeah.
Or Clan or.
Yeah. I think those have started to become like the norm for bikini competitors, where it's rare to find bikini competitors who aren't using Anavar, who aren't using a little bit of Clan, who aren't using a little bit of Nolvadex, just some milder drugs that give them a little bit of the advantage.
Haven't you run into that a lot too, though? Like a lot of girls will be like, oh, I've been training for like a year. I want to do a bikini show. Or how was your last off season? I didn't really take one, but I want to use this bikini show to get back in my groove. And it's like, okay, well.
Well, prepare to spin your wheels and be at the exact same spot every single year. Yeah, it's like the 6 months. It's like they split their periodization is 6 months getting ready for a show. Next 6 months doing absolutely nothing. I'm gonna drink, eat whatever I want, barely go to the gym, and then I'm gonna hit you up 6 months later, and we're gonna do this dance all over again.
And it gets worse and worse every time because they don't.
It gets harder. Yeah, they don't realize. They're like, oh man, why is it harder this year? Well, it's because everything you did in those 6 months after the show set you up to make this way harder. But
yeah.
Nonetheless,
so with that, I think there was a question. I don't know if it's on the list. That I saw that. What do you guys think about employing weight maintenance periods between dieting periods, either to transition into a gaining phase or to transition between leaning phases if you have, whether you're trying to sustain a low level body fat or if you have a lot to lose?
Yeah, we talked about that one last week. That's a good question. Talking about like weight maintenance phases and how to use them.
Man, I think that's a skill that it's talked about a lot recently, right? You guys hear more and more about that. I think it's so valuable, man. Because I know myself, most of my, like bodybuilding or whatever has just been alternating between periods of getting too fat and trying to unfuck that.
Yeah, you should be a powerlifter trying to get into like the 198. That's exactly what it's like.
Yeah. So, I mean, because it's a practice skill, and I think that, you tend to kind of fail at it many times before you get better at that acquired skill.
Yeah.
And, I think also that when you come out of a cut with the intention, maintaining is never maintaining. It's just a control.
A slower rate.
And whenever you go into the mindset of maintain, I think most of the time you end up just kind of gaining at the perfect rate. Versus
I agree.
Going into the mindset of, all right, now it's time to get huge. I'm going to try to gain a half a pound a week or a pound a week. And then you overshoot that because you're coming out of your cut and you're still having refeeds and your cheat days and occasional days. And you sort of need those maintenance days in between to kind of control that. And for those maintenance days to slowly increase, to offset those.
So at that point, it's gaintaining. I think that's what Eric Holmes, calls it. And I think that's really good. I mean, so many people are like, oh yeah, I'm going to start gaining. It's a week passes and they have, they've gained 10 pounds. And it's like, you really just kind of sold yourself short there. That's 3 months you could have been gaining quality muscle, but now you have to cut your gaining phase weeks early.
I feel like Ryan stared right into my soul.
I've switched a lot between and I put it into practice on myself and my clients a lot, between the recovery diet and the reverse diet. So like the reverse diet, a la like Lane Norton, like his definition of it, like very, very slow, very intentional.
1 grain of rice per week.
One grain of rice per 2 weeks, actually, a little slower than that. We don't want to blow up here. We don't want to binge.
Yeah, true.
And then I think that I've kind of settled in the middle. So
Yeah.
in my early days of like the reverse diet, it was like 5 grams of carbs and 1 gram of fat per week. Like that's how slow I was going with it. And I realized that's a little bit too slow. And then I used a recovery diet where it was like, all right, straight out of the diet, let's add 600 calories right away, or 500 to 700 calories right away. And now I've kind of settled in the middle where it's like, all right, why not just be a little bit more control with it? Let's not add 40 calories a week. Let's not add 500 calories a week. Let's add somewhere between 100 to 150 calories a week. That seems to be an amount of food that if the person is choosing the right foods, they're sticking with their like bodybuilding style, like clean foods.
Yeah.
That's enough of a macronutrient increase to where they can have an extra half cup of oatmeal. And then that really satiates them throughout the day. And they can add that every week. I think the foods that you choose and the psychological state that you set the person into really sets them up for success or failure. Because what I found with the recovery diet was, all right, you're allowed to have 600 extra calories. And the person's like, fuck yeah, I can fit ice cream sundaes and Pop-Tarts and Oreos, all that shit that I was missing out on.
Not ready for it yet. Their appetite.
Their body's just not ready for it, and they end up way overeating.
Yeah.
And then when you set them up on the really, really slow, like Lane Norton style reverse diet, they're like, oh my God, this extra amount of food is nothing. There's nothing in the world that can satisfy my hunger. That middle ground allows them to have some extra food, increase their portion sizes, feel a little bit more satiated, increase their productivity in training, move around a little bit more throughout the day, and do some other stuff that can actually offset some of those extra calories. So maybe their caloric intake went up 150 calories, but their NEAT and their EAT went up by 75 calories. So they've kind of offset them. So there's definitely a middle ground.
I know you're definitely speaking like from a general sense, and that like, you know, everybody's different, and you handle everybody differently, you know, depending on where they're at. But I think I'm like you, somewhere in between is probably a really good way for most people, with the considerations kind of being how deep of a deficit were they in. Like if they ended a contest prep in like a, I don't know, 35% or something super deep, then like I probably am going to give them, you know, at least a few hundred calories. You know, I may even try and shoot them up to like 10% under a predicted new maintenance off their new body weight potentially. Versus if somebody ends in like a 10 or 15% deficit based off their new body weight, then for sure, I mean, if you bump them up 100 calories a week, they'll probably be at their maintenance anyway in a few weeks, you know?
Yeah.
And then, you know, I know there are also specific situations where I've had people that just maybe like I've inherited clients that have like that were under other coaches, and they've already been prepping for maybe like 16 weeks, and then I pushed them for another 8 weeks to get them into their show, and then they finish their show and they can't really take either, and we try to do it some slower manner, and it's like, dude, I'm sorry, you're not done. You can't control yourself. I have to bring you to maintenance, maybe even slightly above, you know?
Yeah. So have you either of you guys ever read the book? And this kind of falls in line with this, The Hungry Brain by Stephen Guyenet.
No, but I do like Stephen Guyenet. I just haven't read that book yet.
Yeah. So the book's about like the neuroscience of appetite. And what kind of clicked for me was I remember maybe imagining this. I don't know if you guys saw it. A couple of years ago, Alberto Nunez would talk about how like in the trenches of his prep, he would like barely cook his oats so they wouldn't taste very well, because it allowed him to be just a little bit more satisfied. And I used to be of the camp several years ago of like, carbs are carbs, calories are calories. You know, it's all just energy balance. You know, Pop-Tarts, ice cream, and bacon, whatever, and just some protein powder. And man, it's just really hard to be satisfied with a diet like that if you're on a deficit. You know, and it's like if you had just given me some broccoli and chicken, I would have eaten it and then been like, I don't want any more of this. Like, I think I'm good for this meal. I can hold out. But if you give me like something that tastes good, but I can only have a 600 calorie serving, I'm gonna be like, no, I need to eat the entire thing. So I think there's some merit to like it's pretty boring.
I think I made a story about that the other day where I talked about like using a lot of the sugar-free alternatives and the macro hacks and the protein powder baking stuff. It's like when you're in a very small deficit, that's fine. Sure. Okay. You've got plenty of calories to mess around. That's completely fine. But when you're deep in a deficit and you're spending an hour and a half in the kitchen cooking one meal using 42 different sugar-free sweeteners and sauces and this seasoning, and you got to have this amount of egg whites and a half a serving of protein powder, it just becomes so much where it builds up that food obsession. And like you talked about, it makes the food so delicious and so palatable that no serving is enough to satiate your hunger. And you would have been better off just going with boiled chicken and steamed broccoli, eating half of it and being like, this is fucking disgusting. I'm done.
Well, two things. One, you know what's like shitty about those foods too? A lot of them are like, you know, require what is that stuff called? Like these guar gums, like fibers and stuff, and they make you extremely full and bloated for like 30 minutes, and then you're starving. You just like it's not in your body anymore. You just turn it into syrup and it's gone. And then for sure when you're in a deficit, but I don't think a lot of people realize, like in their reverse diet, even if they are near maintenance or at maintenance and they still have these high cravings, that's still also a time to eat like a bro and not try and eat like oatmeal cream pies and Pop-Tarts because even though you're at maintenance, like you're never satisfied.
So what's interesting, and the reason I brought up Stephen Guanet is in his book he describes, and I haven't read the studies, preface it with that, but you know I love this book. In his book he describes how certain foods, certain sugars, certain things like that can actually not impact the levels of leptin, but impact leptin receptors. And that's the other part of the equation. Like, yes, how much leptin is in you will affect hunger, but also your ability to actually detect that level of leptin, you know? And that's why leptin injections don't work for super obese people. They have high levels of leptin. They just can't recognize it. They're leptin intolerant.
They've smashed those receptors for so long that they're no longer sensitive to it anymore.
And it's in your hypothalamus, and apparently certain foods that you eat can impact that to an extent where, you know, the circulating level of leptin tells you, hey, you're being fat, stop. But, you know, that part of your brain, the hypothalamus that's supposed to detect that is like, I'm not getting it, dude. Like that signal's it's not knocking on the door, you know?
I love the evolution of, you know, kind of evidence, I guess like what I guess you'd call it like evidence-based bodybuilding. How like when If It Fits Your Macros was new, everybody was like, yeah, you can Oreo the shit out of yourself. And we're like saying like, fuck clean foods and, you know, not even acknowledging trigger foods like, and then we're talking about, you know, these scientific mechanisms and we're like, oh no, trigger foods are real. And also like, even if we hate the term clean or like we hate like bro, like it's starting to mesh where we're like, oh, we need these things, you know?
It's the pendulum. The pendulum always swings. It's always there's only clean eating. Wait, if it fits your macros, you can eat whatever you want. Fuck broccoli, only eat Pop-Tarts. And now we're starting to kind of see it swing back to, wait, that shit didn't make you very full. This stuff over here does. I'm gonna go back to this side now. So you see that a lot in training, where even with like I saw it recently with like training programming, where it was like bro splits, only do bro splits. No wait, frequency, the Norwegian Frequency Project. Haven't you read that? Train everything every single day, and then people are like, I'm broken, and now they're coming back to like, maybe we should settle in the middle. So as these huge pendulum swings go back and forth, it's probably best to just kind of hang out right in the middle of like, yeah, there's a purpose for bro foods. They are very satiating. They are low palatability. They will make you feel full. You won't eat them. And then on the opposite side of that, it's plenty okay to have those trigger foods or those IIFYM foods. It's like, let's just hang out in the middle where we have a little bit of both.
I love too the whole like people used to make huge distinctions between meal plans and like flexible dieting, and each one would demonize each other. Where
Yeah.
I feel like everybody, or a lot of people now, are like, well, they're kind of the same thing. Like Monday through Friday, when I'm in my normal schedule, I tend to eat the same foods most days, take the thinking out of it. Even though it's not written on paper as a meal plan, it's basically a meal plan. But then whenever,
Yeah.
the weekends or a scenario comes up where I have a craving, then I fit stuff in, and you know, and then with the
Yeah.
plan only people, it's not like they're not having cheat meals, or like.
Yeah. I think one of the issues is like people tend to think in dichotomies. It's either this or that, here or there, and so one thing like, and also interpreting research, people think like that too. And one thing my old advisor used to say is he would be like, if we do a study that shows that training plan A produces more strength than training plan B, that does not mean that training plan A is the all end all, just the way to go. You might have just found the second worst way to do something, like that's why understand the principles, but keep it in the context. And there's always outliers, right? I mean, you give someone a low volume training program, some people in there might have gained more muscle than the high volume group, right? There's always outliers. There's always, and that's where, being a coach comes in. I know you guys understand this. It's like, you keep the principles in mind, but remember, it's an individual person, not a robot that you're working with. We have to work within the context of their environment and them as a person.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's true. I think that question got destroyed as well. Another 30-minute tangent right there. I hope people enjoy the tangents, because
by the time we finish these questions, I'm like, what was the question? I feel like it's something different.
The question was about best
it was
time.
answered 20 minutes ago.
Best time for a refeed day. What about best time for an off day? So that was the second part of the question. Best time of your week, best time of your training plan to implement an off day. I always tell my clients, listen, like, you're going to have a day of the week where you have to tend to your kids. It's date night with your significant other. You've got a lot of classes that day or whatever. Just fit your off day around your social schedule as opposed to your training schedule. Because if you've got 1 or 2 days a week where you can fit in off days, you just make it fit wherever, because it doesn't really. If you've got a solid plan, let's say it's 5 days a week, like, you could go those 5 days in a row if it's periodized correctly. Let's say it's like push, pull, legs, upper, lower. Like, you could go straight through that, and your training probably wouldn't suffer very much by the end of the week, even if you did 5 in a row and then 2 off, as opposed to like 2 on, 1 off, 2, whatever, however else you want to structure it. So make your off days fit your schedule, as opposed to think that there's some huge benefit from it, is always my advice.
I don't think there's any hard lines there. It really comes down to, the availability of time for that person, what they enjoy. I mean, that's something that's overlooked a lot. If you're giving an optimal program, but you just fucking hate it, like, you're gonna do terribly. You're not gonna do well. But you give a kid who's super passionate a terrible program, and they're still gonna grow muscle. They're still gonna get stronger. Like, we see it all the time.
Yeah, that's how I used to train when I was younger. I think it was called the Rock Hard Challenge. Oh. So it was pretty badass. Wow. It was straight from like Muscle and Fitness. And the chest day was flat bench, incline bench, decline bench, flat fly, incline fly, and the sets were 20, 20, 15, 12, 4, 4 for every single movement.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's why my entire body was broken.
Did you get rock hard?
Flaccid, very flaccid at the end of those.
Yeah, I'm pretty similar, man. When I give my programs, I set off days where I tell them, like, hey, I think these are the best times to take your off days in a perfect world. I like to do a lot of like, if it's a 5-day split, like 2 on, 1 off, 3 on, 1 off, or something like that, or if it's push pull legs or something, 3 on, 1 off. And then like hey, some shit, like, not all my clients are super competitive, and even if you are, like, you can afford to push a training day off a day, move an off day around. Yeah. I do generally, though, like, I try and tell them, like, I prefer them not train more than a few days in a row if they can help it. But that's most just because of me and what I feel after a solid 3 or 4 days of training. I do start to feel a bit run down, like I need an off day.
Yeah. Did you guys ever read the study where they compared kind of a rigid model of training to a more flexible one? And I think they weren't changing like the days in a row that you train, but more so what you're training that day, whether it's more, a power day, a strength day, a hypertrophy day. And, it turns out when you give people a little bit more flexibility, like, today I'm going to train, but, I kind of feel like doing hypertrophy work, or I feel a little beat up. Maybe I just do this instead. And you see across that time period, the group that was more flexible, obviously accruing less fatigue, actually does way better with just having that flexibility in their life.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said about letting the individual auto-regulate their own training, where if they go in there and they're warming up and it's supposed to be their strength day where they have heavy sets of 3 and they're like, man, I'm not feeling it today. Like, I'm just not very strong today. Giving them the option to say, hey, you can do some endurance work today, or you can do some hypertrophy work today. They get a lot more out of that training session, and when they're more rested up going for their strength, they're definitely going to get more out of that.
That's what yesterday, if you look at my program, you'll see yesterday probably should have been one of those days, because on squats I hit like 6 and then like 3 and 3, and you guys can hear me bitching about my back almost.
One other thing that really frustrates me about this is, like, I'll get a client and they'll say, hey, I've got 6 days a week to train. I'm like, all right, cool. And I'll write them a 6-day-a-week training program. And they're like, hey, this week I only have 5 days to train. What do I do? It's like, you train 5 days this week, and then day 1 of next week, you do day 6 of your previous week. And they're like, no, I can't do that. 7 days have elapsed. I must go to my next week of training. That is
my body only understands this
time. My body only understands Monday through Sunday. If it's outside of that,
is like, when you're approached with this, they say it in the most annoying way possible. Like, they text you and they say, hey, I'm going to start week 2 over today because I missed a day or 2 days. I'm like, no, you're not. Yeah. You are not doing that.
I've already gotten questions from people on the website. They'll say, like, hey, I got a question that said, like, hey, the deadlift focused powerlifting program is 6 days a week, and I can only go 5 days a week. What do I do? It's like, you just do it 5 days at a time. And then the next week, when it rolls around, you just do the next day, and then you just keep going. Like, there's no people think that there's like some sort of magic. So, like, all right, if he wrote 6 days a week, then it has to be 6 days a week. If it's 5, it won't work.
Yeah, I mean, for my super busy clients, their microcycles are actually 10 days long. So one full rotation of training is actually 10 days instead of 7. And it all takes just a little bit of planning, and it's not like it doesn't work. It works. As long as adherence is the most important thing. If you can't adhere, the best program in the world isn't going to do crap for you.
So, funny story about that. So I wrote someone a microcycle that was it was a 9-day rotation. It was a 3 on 1 off, 3 on 1 off, 3 on 1 off. And I sent it to this client, and he did 9 sessions in 7 days. He did 2 two-a-days to accommodate the extra sessions, because and his explanation was the tab on the Excel sheet said rotation 1, so I thought it meant week 1, so I had to get it all done in 1 week. And I was like, well, listen, I applaud you. That's very impressive that you got that all in. But please don't ever do that again.
Dude, it drives me nuts, man. I have 8 tabs on training. Or no, 8, because push, pull, legs off, push, pull, legs off. And a guy was like, hey, today I'm going to do legs and back in the same day, both workouts. I'm like, no, don't do that. I'm like, what made you think you needed to fit these 8 tabs in 7 days?
Wow. So going to that, talking about taking from one day to another, I had a friend who he was, like 2009, 2010, he was prepping, I don't know, a long time ago. And he knew that you could like take calories from one day, like to say you undereat a little bit today, take 200 or 300 calories, add it to tomorrow. There's not going to be really that big of a difference. But I guess towards the end of his prep, he was so hungry. What he would do is he would fast for 2 days and then have a 6,000 calorie day. And I was like, so first of all, that's really impressive. But I don't think it works like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think what was he like trying? Is he like a physique or strength based, or is he just like a dude trying to lose some weight?
No. He was competing in bodybuilding, actually, natural bodybuilding. But his hunger signals were so strong that he was like, I need a day where I can just go crazy. And I was like, yeah, but those days that you're not eating, you're certainly messing with some processes in your body that shouldn't be messed with, So you come into that really high day with, some really low, energy expenditure, kind of screwing yourself.
That That's crazy, man. I'm wondering if maybe he took that from like the alternate day fasting studies that tend to be in like obese people and
Yeah,
like competitors, and they're like, oh, I can
that's
do
what I was
Yeah,
thinking.
yeah, yeah. No, he was lean. He was lean. He
that.
was like he was damn well under 10%. It isn't correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't Lyle a proponent of like if you have a photo shoot day or something, it's like a crash diet that you can do where you eat a very low
He
amount of
does.
calories a
I
certain
think he
days,
does the
right?
protein sparing fasting, or
Oh,
the
you said
Yeah, yeah,
modified
yeah,
protein spare fasting.
yeah. Is it
RFL,
the ultimate
fat
diet?
loss. He has two of them, rapid fat loss, and then there's another one called like ERFL or something.
I thought it was the ultimate diet, but yeah.
Oh, Ultimate Diet, I think, is some variation of that he took from like Dan Duchesne or
I thought the
Duquesne.
ultimate diet was some sort of like cyclical ketogenic diet.
I think. Oh, it may be. I've never read it, but I think you're
I
right.
know that those
Dan
are all
Duchesne
distinct
was.
ones. We're probably just naming them incorrectly.
But no,
Yeah.
RFL, it's pretty much like you have a calculation for your like lean mass, and that's how much protein you eat, and then you pretty much eat essential fatty acid like fish oil, and then your only carbs I think can come from like veggies.
Yeah,
Like
I think you're right.
yeah,
I
and
think
it's yeah.
did you guys read giving credit to Menno, he posted some article a couple of weeks ago about the satiety effects of protein. Did you guys happen to read that, where he says, after a certain point where you meet your body's protein needs, protein really isn't that more satiating than say carbs or fats? What are you guys' opinions on that?
I think I read that, but I didn't. Did he link an article with that?
He wrote it,
I don't
right?
I don't remember. I skimmed through it and I thought it was really interesting, but I didn't look into it any further.
The problem with a lot of that research on satiety is that satiety is a very subjective measure. So it's like but all of us, the three of us, eat 40 grams of protein from chicken breast. We're all going to report different satiety index from that 40 grams. So it'd be interesting to read the actual research that he quoted that from, because if it's a lot of subjective data, questionnaires, that kind of stuff,
yeah.
I don't really like the subjective data.
I can't remember if they looked at any biomarkers. There are biomarkers you could look at to measure satiety, but I would imagine, do you guys think maybe your gut bacteria could probably influence how much of those biomarkers are released?
The gut bacteria thing is something that I don't know. I'm not super savvy on it. I don't think it's still so new, isn't it?
It is, and I'm thinking more in the context of actual like appetite regulation.
Well, my question, because I haven't read his article, I have seen it talked about a little bit. I think some of the discussion I've seen makes sense, but I should really read it before I say anything, to be honest. But I think my question would be like, is this data, is it on like normal people who weren't eating that much protein to begin with, and then they jump their protein up from like 60 grams a day to something closer to like 1.6 grams per kilogram, versus like us who are already eating 200 plus grams of protein? How much more satiating is 300 grams going to be, especially when you're in a starved state, like where you're in like a 25-30% deficit, like contest lean? I don't think it helps.
When you guys,
I think the most.
No,
go ahead, Ryan.
I think
the most I eat was I was really hungry. Like after a leaning phase, and I think I got to 380 grams, and I stopped eating, not because I was full, but I was like, I can't eat any more chicken breast.
Disgusting.
Like, this is just gross.
After my last contest, when I had dieted for 9 months, I think that I was hitting like 470, 480, and I was like,
wow.
Like I was having horrible like gastro, like I had nothing but like diarrhea for weeks at a time. I was passing full intact food product, and I was like, all right, I'm doing something very, very wrong here. Something is going wrong in my body. So there's definitely, and it wasn't affecting my satiety. I was still extremely hungry.
What was that when you told me you took down like 4 pounds of cottage cheese a night?
3 pounds of cottage cheese every single night.
Yeah.
2 24-ounce tubs. Yeah, and even that wasn't enough. I would still wake up in the middle of the night and I was still hungry. So I would agree that with what Paul said, if you're going from 500 or 50 to 200, you might see an increase in satiety. The person might feel a little bit fuller. But if you're going from 200 to 300, or 300 to 400, I really doubt you're going to see any additional benefit.
Yeah.
But what I was going to ask is, when you have clients that are reporting a lot of hunger, like uncontrolled hunger, what's your go-to? Because my go-to has always been a slight increase in protein with more of a moderate increase in fiber intake. And I'll give you my reasoning behind that. Protein, because a lot of the research seems to show that increasing protein slightly will improve satiety. But I have them increase their fiber even more, because choosing different or increasing their fiber is going to force them to choose different food items that will have lower palatability. So they're going to have to reach for more of the vegetables, the whole grains, the fiber-rich products that don't taste as good. So then they're going to increase their food or decrease their high palatability food. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
No.
That's kind of what I did to you, Paul.
No, I totally agree. Whenever I get that, a lot of times I don't often give them more protein. That's something I may want to consider, but I do ask them what they're eating, and very often they're still eating stuff like, white rice, which I love, but when you're hungry, probably something like Ezekiel bread is going to be a little better for satiety. And I try to address it that way, and basically tell them to eat higher fiber foods, more veggies, things like that. But I think it depends, like as far as what I would do, it depends on where they're at, whether they're contest prep, they're, post diet, if they can control their binging or not. Like if they're post diet, they can't control their binging, I may just say, well, screw it, you just need more food. We just need to give you more food. We need to kill this. If we can, with making them obese. And then and primarily I would generally do it with carbs and or maybe a little bit of fat. And then, with other people, I mean, sometimes it's just, you just got to look at them and be like, you're the one that wanted to do the show. You're going to be hungry, dude. Sorry. We can pick higher fiber foods, but, 30 minutes after that meal, you're just going to be hungry. It's how it is,
I saw Alberto actually had a good quote about that. He was talking about when you're deep in the end of a diet, you're very, very lean. He said that the high volume foods that you're choosing, that you're eating, aren't actually alleviating the problem. So they aren't actually handling the hunger that you're trying to make go away. You're stretching the living shit out of your stomach, but the stomach stretch reflex isn't what's causing you to be hungry. It's the fact that you've been in a state of low energy availability for the past 4 months. And the only way to rectify that problem is like what Paul said, where you just have to increase food. There's just nothing else that you can do.
I know you're not a fan, but I will, especially if I can afford it, or I think it's the lesser evil. Like if somebody's in a contest prep, I'll give them a diet break where I bring them, I give them maybe 10% more food for a week or some percentage, or bring them just near maintenance. I know you're not a big fan of that, Ryan.
Don't put words in my mouth. I'm not a big fan if you don't have the time for it. If you don't have the time to fit something like that in, if you're 3 weeks out and the person's dying of hunger, and you're like, I'm going to give you a 1 week diet break, like, okay, well, you're just going to look bad on stage. It needs to be at a position in the diet where you actually have, give it like 10 weeks out, like, okay, yeah, we can do a diet break right now. But what you said about, hey, this is going to be hard, you chose to do this, that's kind of the speech that I always have prepared when it's like 2-3 weeks out, and they're like, my life is hard. Yeah, I agree.
I think for me, since the majority of my clients that I do nutritional coaching with are just general population, I don't have that stress of a deadline to meet. With them, I do what you do, Paul. I do, I have access to their MyFitnessPal, and I'll first look at it, and I'll be like, hey, why are you spending 800 calories on corn dogs? And if that's the issue, I have them change the kinds of foods they're eating to like way more boring foods. And then I'll increase their protein slightly. And if that's not the case, if they're still hungry and they're eating a reasonable diet, then I just do that. I mean, I actually just take them out of a deficit, slightly above maintenance, actually, for like at least 4 weeks. And usually when they come back, that weight starts dropping off so fast with no hunger at all, But it's a different situation with someone who's general population. And I think even if you increase and like you said, lesser evil, even if you increase them to a 500 calorie deficit a day for 2 weeks, okay, they'll gain 2 or 3 pounds. That is still better than them binging 8 pounds in 2 weeks, which people will do. You know what I mean? Like,
that's very true.
Yeah. I think I'm a little more empathetic and loving than Ryan.
Not me. I don't give a shit about your problems. Get it done. You said you wanted to get it done. You paid me to take you from A to B. How dare you even suggest a detour to C?
We're getting there. Even if the wheels fall off.
The wheels fall off, I'll push you. I'll be your wheel. Come stay at my house. I'll cook your food for you. We'll get you there, and then when we're on the other side, then we'll bring you back to real life.
That's what I need to do the last month of contest prep. Maybe the whole last half is just
telling you.
Come sleep on your couch.
The show is in
Have
Florida.
You, like, chain me to a table at night so I can't like sneak around and get food.
Dude, Anthony was talking about doing that. But seriously, come stay at Camp Squat Father. I'll cook your food for you. I'll get your supplements ready for you, and
it just ends with us in your kitchen, me crying with like food on my face, and
just me with my boot on your chest. And that was the last we ever saw of Paul.
Oh.
I have some good areas in my backyard where I could for sure bury your dead body, and no one would ever find you. I'm pretty confident.
Good to know.
Yeah. How long have we been going for?
An hour and a half.
All right, so let's wrap it up. That's that.
Yeah.
All right, so what are our closing statements going to be? Closing statement number 1, go sign up for the website, www.giftedperformance.com. Get your first 2 weeks free, 100% automated online coaching, 15 training programs to choose from, nutritional programming, check-in features, and access to the lovely 3 folks that you see in front of you today. Thomas, pour one out for Thomas. He'll be on the next one. I think there's some questions that I think would be more suited for him on the next one. So catch us on the next episode. Stay girthy. Closing statements from my friends over here.
I double up on everything Ryan said. The website's going to be phenomenal. I highly recommend it to everybody. We're all going to be writing for it. There's going to be articles up there where we go more in depth in things that are, you are limited by the scope of a podcast. Pretty much. So if you're more interested in the nitty gritty of stuff, I think the articles will obviously be super beneficial to you.
No one reads anymore, dude. We need like
That's fair.
Videos.
That's Paul's closing statement. No one reads.
No one reads.
You'll go to your room. You read now.
I guess now would be a good time to plug the website I've been working on with its own training programs. And just I don't know what you guys want me to say. You already
tell everyone to stay beautiful.
Oh yeah, check out the website. And check
out Paul's brand of coaching, ETN coaching, ETN_coaching. Is that what it is on Instagram?
On Instagram, yeah. I mean, dude, that's just a place for me to post transformation photos. I still use my main Instagram as the Instagram where I inform people.
Yeah, Instagram's at the Squat Father, at mtor_EMTORE.
Now it makes sense.
Yeah.
At Polly_Rocket and at ETN_coaching, I believe.
Yes.
And then you can find all of us at giftedperformance.com and at Thomas Neal, Thomas, TOMAS_Neal. I think that's a wrap for today.
All right, sounds
Back
good.
next time.
All right, let me click stop recording.